And so I really think that it's time to get started. I want to introduce Susan, who is going to give you some introductory remarks. I think most of you know Susan, who's the CEO of OVF. I'm Chip Levengood. I'm the chairman of OVF, and I welcome you all to this conference and turn the microphone over to Susan.
Okay. I have to give Paige time to run up to the control booth there with the slide advancer. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today here at Summit 2014. We're very proud to announce that this is our 8th summit. However, it's the first time that we are joining together and working together with a co-host, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. I believe the outcome of working together with the Lawyers Committee is obvious. The seats today will all be filled, barring any new surprises from Mother Nature, of course. Let's thank them for their contribution to Summit. Thank you, Barbara, Sonia, Stacy, Alan, Tanya, Chris, and all of you. Without collaboration and sponsorship, none of this could be possible. We're honored with the ongoing sponsorship from Global Touch. And this year, we also have a new location sponsor. That's the Center for Second Service. They do great work helping vets run for office and win. We're going to hear more from them later this afternoon. So thank you, sponsors, for your support. Just a tiny note in case you're into social media. We do Twitter a bit here. We have a hashtag for today, which is Voting Summit, number 14, Voting Summit 14. And if you're not following us yet, you can start. We have US_vote and overseas vote. So we'd be happy to have you as a follower and to see your tweets appear as well. So let's start in on our agenda with a look at what OVF and US Vote are up to this year, 2014. OVF is now hitting a decade since we developed the first online wizard to assist UOCAVA voters, that's overseas and military voters, to request their absentee ballots. It's a milestone, and we're proud of it. We continue to engage voters on our sites. With every interaction, OVF returns their efforts with value. When it comes to online voter services, we succeed in keeping ahead with the most comprehensive set of services. We provide real service. What is real service? It's making a phone call and having someone there to pick up the phone on the other end. It's finding everything you need to vote in one place. It's about going from a website to a value-based experience. And there's a long distance between those two things. Real service, unfortunately, around voting is very often still considered the exception. In 2012, we launched US Vote. In 2014, we're moving it forward. Meet our new homepage. It's not gimmicky. It's not cute. It works. It's about providing all voters, young and old, working, traveling, studying, parenting, with knowledge and tools that they need to participate. The input is simple, swift, and friendly. The output could be one of 100 different state-specific forms, one of 50 different absentee ballot requests. They're all state-specific. It could be one of 8,500 different election contact details. You don't need to know. That we sort out for you. You just need the one. Every voter will find their state-specific registration and ballot request, the one that they need. You'll also find the best election official directory, We carry more data for every single record than you'll find anywhere else. This is why NAS and UPS license this data amongst a set of great states and counties that we continue to work with. Our Voter Help Desk is where you can ask personal questions and get an answer from a real person back. We've answered 10,000 voter questions, and we're on our way to the next 10,000. We have clear and simple charts for dates, deadlines, and regulations. And with a little help from our friends at VoteSmart, we have an excellent candidate finder. All of these services are together in one place. They're available to you with no barrier. You don't have to do anything special to get to them. But for those of you who want to invest more in your civic life, here's how. I'd like to introduce you to our new upgrade of My Voter Account. MVA has been a dream application of mine since I started OVF, and now I predict it will be the future of our organization. MVA will drive our development for the next 24 months. We've gotten a big boost from the Democracy Fund with a recent grant, and we'll be bringing in data from more sources. This is a service that works for you as the voter. It gives you a way to manage your personal democracy with voting as a central action. MVA gives you an ROI on effort. It gives you a return for your voting effort. When you log into your voter account, you don't even need to navigate to our different services. The push and pull is customized to you. My Voter Account makes the leap between what we're capable of offering you as a voter and what you get in return. What we do believe? We believe that real service is the best way to engage voters. It's how we run our operation. We believe that real service is the future of the voter experience. Now let's hear more about how technology is changing the voting landscape. Lately, we've had a few surprises from Mother Nature. One of them came yesterday when our opening keynote speaker was iced in the state of Florida. But as they say, every cloud, silver lining. It gave us an opportunity. The opportunity was to introduce you to yet another shining star in the election industry. And her name is Tammy Patrick. Tammy is the Federal Compliance Officer in Maricopa County, Arizona, but she's also one of the commissioners that helped to develop this. You'll all be getting one of these later this afternoon. This is the most recent report from the Presidential Commission on Election Administration. And Tammy was with them every step of the way. She also is joining OVF and a group of esteemed scientists and election officials on a new joint project that you'll also hear about this morning. So Tammy spans the entire range. She has a lot to tell us, and let's welcome her now. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is very exciting to be here, and I'd like to share with you my presentation, which is right there. So as Susan mentioned, I am currently the Federal Compliance Officer in Maricopa County Elections Department, which is in Phoenix, Arizona. And for the last 6 months, I've been privileged to serve on the President's Commission on Election Administration. As she also mentioned, I am Plan B. I'm your consolation prize. So I know Pat is watching, and we're very sad that she wasn't able to join us today. But occasionally in life, and very often in elections, the weather gets in our way. Who would know that it would be snowing and sleeting and icy in Florida, okay? So what I wanted to do today is share with you and kind of set the stage for the day's presentation within the context of the President's Commission. Looking forward, as Susan mentioned, we have the report this afternoon. We will have hard copies available for all of you. We do ask that, depending on how many people are here, we have about 300 copies. So if you could just take one to start with, and once everybody has their copy, if there are some left over, please feel free to take additional ones for your colleagues. But I wanted to talk about what we heard when we traveled around the country, and what did we recommend when we spoke to the president and the vice president, which is still difficult for me to say those words, last week. And all of the report, the videos of our hearings, the transcripts, numerous resources, and extensive appendices to the report, I believe it's close to 2,000 pages, are all available on the website. And if you haven't been to the website yet, please use that as a resource. It's supportthevoter.gov. Now, a year ago, the president, in his State of the Union address, which he gave this year's just 2 nights ago, said that he was announcing a nonpartisan commission to improve the voting experience in America. And that was really our main goal, was to look at the voters' experience and try and discern why exactly we had those long lines, and were there some recommendations that we could make in order to alleviate that. So we had meetings all around the country. We had meetings everywhere from the aforementioned Florida to, whoops, sorry about that. This presentation is a slightly different one than the one I had last night. So hearings all the way from Florida to Anchorage, Alaska, from New York to San Francisco. And when you look at that map, it looked almost as though we were concentrating on the eastern seaboard, which, being here in Washington, you maybe think that's okay. But we really heard from election administrators all around the country. And I think that's really important to know. So we also heard from many of you here in the audience today, stakeholder groups, particularly with the concern of military and overseas voters, which was one of the mentioned areas in the executive order. So we heard from the Overseas Vote Foundation, from the Federal Voting Assistance Program, from Reserve Officers Association, Military Voter Protection Project, and the United States Post Office, because of course that is one of the paths that many of our voters receive their ballots. But in addition to that, we heard, as I mentioned, many of you here in this audience. And we want to just, personally, I want to take a minute to thank you for your input, because it was really, really critical in our process. We were looking at not only how do we address the issues that all of our voters face, but also discrete populations like military and overseas voters. So in the hearings that we conducted, you may recognize this gentleman. You've probably seen him in pictures with Queen Latifah recently. So in our hearings, we heard from state and local election officials. Here's a picture from our Denver hearing, Dean Logan from Los Angeles County. And we're going to hear from Dean shortly, and hopefully also from Dana DeBeauvoir, but she was also impacted by the weather, so we're not sure of her travel status as of right now. But they talked and provided invaluable information about the cutting-edge systems that they are implementing or looking to develop in their jurisdictions. We also heard from academics and topical expert testimony. Here's a picture from our Miami hearing, and Harvard professor Stephen Anzolabayer. You also can see Charles Stewart in this particular picture. And this morning we're going to hear from additional experts in the field of elections on the work that they're doing. Many of these same individuals we're going to hear from today were at a hearing that we held in Cincinnati, Ohio. It was an exceedingly large table and was devoted solely to voting technology. And it was a 2-day hearing, and again, these are all available on the website. One of the most critical aspects of the hearing process, though, was to hear from the voters themselves. This is from the Philadelphia hearing, and in this particular hearing, the young woman that you see here pictured, although she's an attorney, Voting Rights Act is her specialty, the testimony that she was providing was her own personal experience, both for herself and for family members, as voters who had the challenges of limited English proficiency, which was another one of our tasks. And the commission work that we had was always to be voter-centric and to keep that in mind in their voting experiences. So what did we hear out there in the world? Well, jurisdictions are struggling with resources. They're struggling with a lack of resources, the quality of the resources that they have available to them, the distribution, in some cases, of the resources that they have. They maybe have enough, but haven't placed them in the right locations where the voters need them. Additionally, many of the election officials that we heard from are dissatisfied with the options that are available to them on the current market. There was concern with the stymied standard setting process because of the lack of EAC commissioners. There isn't a mechanism in place to be able to certify and to put forth new standards so that we can address some of the innovations that are current in our daily lives. So the current standards were set prior to the onset of tablet technology and iPads and all of the things that we are so incredibly reliant upon, including myself right now as I'm scrolling through my alternative presentation. So jurisdictions want desperately to utilize some of this new technology, but currently there's some hesitancy in how they can actually do that. So what did we recommend to the president and the vice president? As I mentioned before, this afternoon we are going to have one of our co-chairs here. Bob Bauer will be joining us. Ben Ginsberg is a new grandfather, and as of just a couple of days ago, and so he was unable to make the trip. But I will be joining Mr. Bauer later on this afternoon to talk about the broad aspects of our report. So today what I really wanted to do was hone in on what we recommended that really associates specifically to military and overseas voters. So all of the recommendations in the report that we have are successful programs that have been implemented in jurisdictions around the country. And that's important to know. So these aren't things that could possibly work. They're things that are working in some areas. But although not all of the recommendations should or maybe could be adopted by every jurisdiction in the country, if the adoption of some of them happens, or any of them happen, it'll improve the voting experience of many people. So one of the first recommendations that we had to do with the UOCAVA and overseas MOVE Act considerations that covered voters receive, and namely that installation voting assistance officers need to fulfill the duties that are assigned to them and make sure that the military voters are receiving information on updating the voter registration and that it's being incorporated into the paperwork and the procedures that are taking place when our soldiers are being moved. We also felt that election administrators need to really ensure that they are complying with deadlines and mailing dates, and that notifications are being sent in a timely manner, because this population of voters really need to make sure that they're getting information from us directly, because they may not be in a situation where they're exposed to some of the other media that we have the ability to access here in stateside. Additionally, the military postal service and the United States Postal Service need to make sure that they're providing the mandated services, that the tracking is available, the expedited service, and the free mailing from the elections office to the voter and back is actually taking place. The Commission, it's very important to know, was not tasked in any way with proposing legislation. However, we felt it was very critical to note that there is current statutory requirements that should be enforced or more greatly enforced. And we did not comment on existing laws. We did not comment as far as voter ID or the Voting Rights Act or the Century Act, or any of those distinct situations that we're kind of contemplating currently. Now, one of the main recommendations that we had to do with ballot usability. And ballot usability, of course, impacts the time that it takes someone to complete their ballot. And that was one of the challenges that we saw for voters down in Florida when they had anywhere from a 3 to a 6-page ballot, front and back sides. Okay, some of the propositions were 600 to 700 words long. So UOCAVA voters have that additional challenge that they don't have as much time to vote, and they need to be able to have a ballot that's very intuitive and that can quickly be voted. So even though having concerns with ballot length and content and ballot language and the format and the delivery of the ballot to the voter and the receipt of the voter return materials will affect all voters, it's critical for our military and our overseas. federal postcard application. One of the things that surprised me the most, and I've been doing this for only 10 years, so of course every day there's some new surprise in the elections process around this country, was that when we talk about the validity of a federal postcard application and how long it's good for, even though we're all using the same terms, we're interpreting the definitions differently. So for my jurisdiction, a federal postcard application is taken at face value that it's both registration and an absentee ballot application. So we register the voter like we would on any other voter registration form, and the time period that the FPCA is valid is only in reference to the ballot application. So we don't cancel them at the end of that year or that 2 federal cycle. They're still a registered voter. We just don't send them a ballot automatically as we would normally. But that's not the way it is in all jurisdictions in all states in this country. In many places, a UOCAVA voter is relegated almost as a temporary voter, where they're allowed to vote, but they don't accrue a history. And again, their registration is canceled at the end of that time period. So we recommend that voters completing a registration form on a federal postcard application are afforded the same treatment as all other voters. And that means they're a regular, active voter, and that includes getting a voter history when they vote, and that they can only be canceled in compliance with the National Voter Registration Act. Additionally, then, the federal postcard application time period, no matter what it happens to be, would just be in reference to the ballot application itself. So if we're going to talk about forms that our UOCAVA voters have, the other thing that we recommended in the report has to do with the FWAB. Okay, so the federal write-in absentee ballot in many states is considered a voter registration form because that voter is attesting that they sent in an application to register to vote, they sent in an application to receive a ballot, and they haven't gotten a voter registration card and they haven't gotten a ballot, so their last-ditch effort is the FWAB. But many jurisdictions will deny that federal write-in absentee ballot if they don't have an actual request on record, which seems counterintuitive to me, and we think that that should be remedied, so that the federal write-in absentee ballot should be recognized as a full voter registration form, and it's intended to service those who have already tried to. They're swearing and attesting, and we want to take them at their word for that. Now, providing online services. This is another one of those points that really addresses the broad spectrum of voters, but is critical for our military and overseas voters. And what we were referring to about online services have to do with voter registration, sample ballots. Polling place location doesn't necessarily affect our military voters all that well, but it does when it comes to district locator tools so that they know who they are eligible to vote for. And additionally, we felt that the disposition of the voter's ballot needs to be included. And what I mean by that is that if you happen to be a voter who's voting by mail, you should be able to go online and see that your ballot was mailed from the jurisdiction to you and what date that was. And then when you mail the ballot back, to be able to either track it through the entire process or to, at a very minimum, know that the ballot was received back by the jurisdiction and that everything was okay, or if there was something that the voter still needs to do. Many people have said, well, that takes a lot of money. And there is an initial outlay for creating some of these online services, but in many cases, the savings have been demonstrated. In my jurisdiction in Arizona, we were the first state to have online voter registration. And a couple of years ago, we did some studies with both the Pew and with the Brennan Center to look at the cost of online voter registration. What we found is that it's exceedingly helpful in us saving money. So for every form that gets keyed in on the online system and we don't have staff doing it, we're saving 80 cents for every single form. And we, in my jurisdiction alone in Arizona, get about $325,000 a year that come through our online system. And that's, on top of that, we have a savings of about 85% of our printing costs. So those cost savings can be, and resources can be shifted to other areas, which can certainly help in our strapped economy. Additionally, necessity is the mother of invention, and election administration is very fertile ground, we'll say, for invention, and that's some of what you're going to hear about today. Later on this morning, we're going to hear from experts who tie in additional recommendations that are in the report, such as the importance of data collection and analysis, so that we are basing our decisions on sound reason and facts. We're also going to hear about, and what's in the report, about the necessary function of auditing to make sure that everything is flowing as it should, and the need for election officials, technologists, computer scientists, voter advocacy groups to work together to ensure that the voting experience lives up to the expectation of the American people and that it builds confidence in our democratic process. So with that, I would like to, I should probably go back, see. It advanced on its own volition, sorry. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time today, and I look forward to speaking to you again later on this afternoon when Mr. Bauer comes. I would like to preface that we will have a very open session with the co-chair of the commission and myself. He'll have some remarks to talk about some of the broader aspects of the report, and then we will be taking questions at that time about the report. So if there's something, a burning question that you'd like to have, be thinking about it now, and we'll speak to you again this afternoon. So with that, I want to thank you, and sorry you couldn't make it, Pat, so stay warm in Florida. Okay, so thank you.
Yeah, Pat, hi. Sorry you're not with us, but I know you're with us in spirit. I have the pleasure of introducing Adam, Ambrogi, and Susan, that you've already met. They're going to talk a little bit about the project that we're undergoing with the support of the Democracy Fund. And many of you probably know Adam from his days of service in the Senate Rules Committee and his new job with the Democracy Fund. So I don't want to repeat his biography. I just want Adam to get out here and talk to us about the great stuff that's happening.
Thanks so much, Chip. And as always, thanks to Chip and Susan and OVF, as well as the partners for this event, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, for pulling this whole thing together. This may be my 6th OVF Summit. I was happy, actually, while I was still working with the Senate, to attend the one in Munich and get to meet a lot of overseas and military voters where they live and hear some of their experiences, both good and bad, with the voting process. That was it's really instructive for me. At times, as a staffer, you hear of folks, doing an international trip, and you're like, well, it sounds like a junket, sounds like something that's not really tied into the important legislative work that folks needed to do. But in this period of time, right around working on and then passing the MOVE Act, it was really essential to get out there and talk to folks that lived on a base, that lived in a foreign city, that felt that were, truly and passionately American voters, felt so connected to the political system, but had these unusual barriers that they had to overcome to get access to the vote. Hearing some of the questions and concerns from them made really all the difference in the world in both our commitment to moving forward with the MOVE Act, as well as seeing that the act is implemented. I now work for the Democracy Fund, which is a new philanthropic organization created by Pierre Omidyar of eBay fame. The Democracy Fund's purpose, boldly stated perhaps, is that it is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And it is as such broken down into 3 areas of focus. First, there's a belief that our politics are too polarized, that folks can't come together from the left and the right to work on enough issues. And we need to figure out ways, both systemic and direct, that we can start attacking those particular issues. Second, the issue of informed participation, that the public needs to be accurately informed of what's going on in our politics and in our public life, that there is not enough accuracy in the media, that the folks are not engaged enough in civic life and have the information they need to make the right political choices when they go to the ballot box, when they decide to engage in a campaign or volunteer. And so for that bucket of issues, we focus on improving fact-checking, improved civic education and information, and a focus on local journalism and media to bolster the strength of state and local journalists that are trying to do good investigative research. And then third, what we call responsive politics, which is the area that I'm leading up at the Democracy Fund. And the goal is really to amplify the voice of individuals, making sure that in issues related to money and politics, that average folks have the same ability to contribute and have a voice in the process without having it overly drowned out by large special interests in a fair political system. And then when they decide to enter and engage in the political process by registering and going to vote, they can do that easily, securely, and have that vote count at the end of the day. And it's in this area that we're proud to announce the work that we are doing with this project with the Overseas Vote Foundation and a number of organizations. A little bit of background, I think, is important to let you know how we got to this point. This is my 10th year sort of focusing on election administration and campaign finance. I joined as an attorney and counsel for Ray Martinez of the Election Assistance Commission during its first year in 2004. In that time, we really, in the post-HAVA days, really we're trying to dive down into how machines are certified, tested, reviewed, how they can be made secure over time, accessibility concerns, as well as the multitude of concerns that are facing the military and overseas vote community. After the EAC, I took a spot at the Senate Rules Committee. My colleague Sonia Gill is actually working this from the Lawyers Committee of Civil Rights. She was a counsel with me at the Senate Rules Committee working on MOVE Act stuff, so it's great to see her there. And during my 7 years on the Rules Committee, focusing deeply on issues of military and overseas vote problems, there really, you could see a divide in the field. You have three discrete communities that have somewhat of a policy tension related to one of the big problems impacting the military and overseas vote community, the fact that they live far away, the fact that snail mail may take up to 35 to 40 days round-trip transmission time. We were able to, as part of the drafting process for the MOVE Act, support with OVF and the Pew Charitable Trust's elections initiatives and many other folks to focus on the no time to vote issue. And we tried to tackle that in a number of different ways. We were able to insert or mandate that for military and overseas voters, they could request and receive a blank absentee ballot via email for the first time ever as part of a requirement in federal law. And then that ballot could be printed out, filled out in accordance with the state laws and then returned. There was some comment and some thought in the process of evaluating that proposal of, well, why don't we make it a round-trip requirement? You go from 40 days to potentially immediately if you're able to submit a ballot online. Back in 2009, and I would hazard to say still today, there is a considerable and serious debate about the security of any sort of return ballot submitted online. And there are many excellent computer science professionals that we will hear from today that raise meaningful and serious concerns about the security of attacks and denial of service, manipulation of ballots, and the concern of switching the voted ballot without any record of that attack being made. On the other hand, you have election officials that have an interest in trying to process an election and deal with a population that has significant needs that take a lot of time and concern. And they want to make things easier for the voter. They want to do it with a relatively low cost. And they want to get it right for the military and overseas voting population. And then you have the voters themselves. And, having talked to a bunch of military and overseas voters, in the past, there is a real tension when you sort of discuss this issue of security and remote transmission of ballots. Some folks say, I don't care, I have so much trouble getting the ballot, I just want it remotely. Others say, well, I really think that it's important that I can print out the ballot and hold it in my hand, and I can verify that it's mine and put it in the remote, put it in overnight mail or the express mail systems that have been set up to submit my ballot to the polling place. But they want to vote. They want to try to vote as easily as possible, and they want it to be secure. So in the process of dealing with the legislative drafting of the MOVE Act, we talked with the verified voting community and determined that the best way to handle this back in 2009 was to mandate the one-way blank ballot transmission and to remain silent on what's going on with any sort of return ballot, understanding that the state of technology and security was not where it needed to be. So years have passed for right now, and the problems associated with this question, this policy divide of security and remote ballot transition, have been amplified over time. And my personal concern is that work is not being done to try to tackle these issues. We know that there are security problems and that there are meaningful thinkers out there that can try to work on that and try to address these issues. We know that with some types of cryptographic voting solutions, they can be complicated. And so as you're coming up with a potential solution that would allow meaningful security and verification, you need to be able to develop a system that average voters can use, can understand, and have it not be too complicated. And then you need the input of election officials. They're the ones that will have to run a system. They're the ones that will have to pay for whatever type of remote transmission process will be in place. And you need the buy-in for that. And so all of these things are incredibly important to the process. When I moved into my new role at the Democracy Fund, Susan approached me and said, there's a group of committed computer scientists and academics and experts that are interested in coming together with election officials, with usability experts and other policy professionals to try to begin to research this problem. Is there a way to come up with a secure remote voting system that is usable, that is not terribly expensive, that can be tested publicly, and has a little bit more confidence in the system? Do we expect anything magical to come from this anytime soon? No. I think that we need strong development and strong research that can add to the public debate, that we can contemplate what voting will look like in 3, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Because if we're not doing this important research and we're not seriously thinking about ways to improve the public debate and handle the tension between security and access for this community, we're not really doing our jobs. And there had been a stalemate, and I was very glad to be able to work with Susan and all the folks that are in the room on this project to get it started. And I think that it will, if nothing else, will really spur some conversations on how to do remote voting in a secure way, have it tested, and also serve this particular community. So that's my comments. I'd like Susan to sort of introduce the more nitty-gritty details of the project. So thank you.
I heard this wasn't loud enough earlier, so hopefully I won't be too loud now. Anyway, first I'd like to thank Adam and the Democracy Fund for the support. It's really opened up a whole new opportunity for us. I really just have a little bit more context to how we arrived here, maybe in some different words. But Adam did a great job of covering, giving you a sort of foundation here for what's going on from his level and from his perspective and everywhere that he's been, the Senate, the EAC. I can imagine that Adam's had his ears full for years from people trying to convince him to set up laws to do exactly what they want done. So maybe that opened the ears a little bit when you have the opportunity to make change. It's exciting to work with an organization like the Democracy Fund that is inspired to make change and willing to take bets on who they work with and how they do it. Again, I'm going to just say it one more time. I don't know if those presidential committee people or commission folks timed their report for us and this project and this event, but it was pretty nice of them to release that last week. And it was great that they highlighted the decaying state of our voting systems and this sort of untenable process, really, for certification. It's a crisis waiting to happen. It's going to take maybe a meltdown to really change it in a big way. That said, a lot of people out there have to run elections full well knowing it could be the day that the 40-pound Diebold machine breaks its legs, seriously. Election officials are having to cope with this all the time. Some of them are taking proactive measures to move forward. They're beginning to work with technologists to develop the types of systems that they would like to see available. That's exactly why we named this session, this entire morning session, Grassroots Innovation in Elections. You've heard about how OVF and the Democracy Fund were about to enter into a new research endeavor. Actually, the planning for this has been going on. That endeavor is called, technically, the End-to-End Verifiable Internet Voting Specification and Feasibility Assessment Study. It's a mouthful. Don't tune out. We have a short name for it. That's E2E-VIV project. That's what we'll relate it. That's what we'll call it. And we'll define it, of course. Some of you probably know that I started my career in the software industry. And it was a great time. Silicon Valley, boy, there was a lot of competition. Microsoft didn't own everything. Apple didn't own everything. There was a lot going on. And it was really an interesting culture. The companies that I worked in, they had a real problem-solving culture. If you were, well, you learned quickly. You don't walk into a meeting and complain or list your set of problems. You walk in with a solution or don't say anything because you're going to be the first one out. So it was a whole way of thinking. Every problem was actually seized upon. If you got the problem first, you might get the answer first. And that was good. You wanted to be the one with the answer. You wanted to be the one with solutions. Well, a few years forward, about 6 years ago, I was invited to join an organization that's called the Election Verification Network. We call it EVN for short. It's dedicated to the topic of election integrity. It's comprised, as Adam related, although you didn't mention it, the composition of the group is very diverse. Technologists, researchers, scientists, academics, and, fortunately, election officials. All of these people have one thing in common. They're striving for accurate elections. They're striving for integrity in our elections. And the learning, supporting, communicative power of this network is really tremendous. What I've noticed, however, is that over the years, very, very often, the members of the EVN network were pitched in local and state battles, trying to affect the decision of whether or not the internet should be used as a conduit for transmitting ballots. It's a very serious decision, usually not taken too lightly, but unfortunately often done maybe by non-experts. Reaching out to experts is not automatic for everyone. People who come in and say, your idea isn't really a good idea, they stop getting invitations. Despite all that, election officials need to solve real problems, and they need to solve them now. There are no certified online voting systems in the US, and I'll challenge every one of you to find a respected, credentialed computer scientist or cybersecurity expert in the United States who's going to recommend putting voted ballots on the internet. Find them for me. The reason for that, because, as Adam already alluded, those ballots can be tampered with. Remember, I came out of the software industry, the Unix business. Why do you think I'm a little bit skeptical? So, these ballots can be tampered with indiscernibly. What do we do about that? There's so much energy going out in the network to educate people that transmitting ballots on uncertified systems or through fax or email really isn't safe. This, clearly, it's hard for most of us to understand. I mean, we do a lot on the internet, don't we? And it's more every day. And it's fun, and it's convenient, and why not vote on the internet? I got to break the news to you. Voting is not like online banking. There is a real difference. Voting is anonymous, and banking is not. From a technical and systems development standpoint, that really changes everything. It becomes a whole different problem. We really can't put up with the amount of fraud and loss that we have in our retail and banking system in our elections, and I don't think any one of you would want us to. Target can get away with it. Elections cannot. There's no way. Elections are a matter of our national security, and we need to know that we're not losing one or two ballots. Sometimes those are the ones that make the decision of the election. So it's really a frustrating situation. These election officials need new systems. We need them to get new systems. We're the voters that have to use those old systems. We're the ones who have to worry about the 40-pound machine falling on our feet. And, you know, the election officials, they go out to seek answers. They're not getting the answers they really want. They'd like to get answers like, hey, yeah, here's something great, or take a look at this, and hear that it has been certified and it could be used for this particular problem. But actually right now, there aren't even any tests or agreements on the technology and security standards that we need to meet. How do you test for that when you don't know what you're testing for? There are constant arguments on all sides of this. There's a real tension, as Adam said, to move forward with online voting. And the scientists, that's coming from the scientists, the election officials, the voters, and vendors. No one, however, is winning. There's no real progress, and we need to change this situation. So how do we break open the stalemate? It seems like it's been stuck forever. About 10 months ago, I went to an EVN event, and I listened to a couple of very smart people. They're here today to talk to you as well. One of them is Josh Benelo, who's a senior cryptographer from Microsoft Research, and the other, Dana DeBeauvoir from Travis County, Texas. And there are more, but I'll start with those because I heard from them last March. They were talking about a project that they're doing together that's called Star Vote, and the concept of security and the properties of that system, they called it E to E, or end to end. Now that's a term that's thrown around a lot, especially in marketing literature for systems. But there are different ways of defining it. I will give you a definition now. Josh will define it again. You probably need to hear it a couple times. Again, don't tune out. It's actually not tough. It's a refreshing concept. And again, it's not just one technology. It's a property of an election. So what it does is it allows voters to check that their ballots are counted as cast. At the same time, it also allows anyone to tally the results of an election. So imagine that. No trust required, no black box. What I really liked about this idea, it synced up so much with my idea of internet security, that there isn't any. You have to design with the assumption that you're going to be hacked into. It changes what you need to do. It becomes a question of detection and response. You have to design a system where the tampering could be identified, even by the voter. And then you need a response that's ready. With this idea, I saw the opportunity to open up the conversation. I started talking to a few members of the network about maybe we should look at this for in regards to remote voting, where there's really this stalemate. What a great way to approach it. Perhaps we should try. That brings me back, of course, to the Democracy Fund and this project. With their support, we've actually begun. The project will last through to around May of 2015, so we have about an 18-month timeline. Yesterday, we started here in Washington, D.C. We welcomed 35 very smart people from all around the U.S. that you get to mingle with today. And we're super excited because the Carnegie Mellon University Heinz College of Information Systems Management has given us a team of graduate students to work with us, and they're doing a project that they call their capstone project. That's really the peak project of their final time in their program. So you're going to hear about some of these concepts in more depth. It would seem logical that we would have Josh come on now and then our panel on E2E come on, but we decided to mix it up a little bit, and we didn't realize that we'd be ahead of schedule on the agenda, which means you get a longer break if we still are. What we're going to do is next hear from two people that inspired this project. And then after the break, we'll go back to exactly what the project is and talk about some of the really controversial issues that it brings up in areas of security, usability, testing, and verifiability or auditability. So, on the subject of inspiring people, some of you might know Dean Logan of Los Angeles County, California. His election jurisdiction is the size of a small country. And he's waiting to come onto the stage and tell us about one of the projects that he's worked on in the past few years. We also have Dana DeBeauvoir from Travis County, Texas, who we're expecting. We're wondering if Mother Nature's cooperating with her this morning. If not, as I said, I don't think a longer break will disappoint anyone. But I can't see out of the back of my head to know if she's here right now or if she made it. But these two, there are two stars of the election community. They're both thought leaders, and better than that, they're doers. Alongside all of the work they have to do, and you can imagine these are two of the largest jurisdictions in our country, they're actually rising above those daily challenges to run and conceive of development projects that fix the actual voting problems that they encounter. It's very innovative work that they're doing. It's really exciting. We all want it to succeed, and we want more of them to populate around the U.S. So let's listen to what they have to say now. Dean, I hope you're hiding in the wings. Please take it away. Thank you all.
Good morning. It's great to be here, and thank you, Susan, for that introduction. I hope I can live up to your comments and to the comments that Tammy made earlier today. It's really an honor to be here and to be part of this summit and to have the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about the work that we're doing in Los Angeles County. I want to start out first, though, by thanking the Overseas Vote Foundation, the U.S. Vote Foundation, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and as well as the Democracy Fund for the work they're doing in this space. I think it's really important to recognize from the perspective of an election administrator that our ability to innovate and to begin to be proactive instead of reactive in how we present the voting experience to our electorate is dependent on these organizations that allow for this kind of dialogue and that bring people from different industries together, get us around a table talking to each other. I joked when I spoke last year at an event that the Lawyers Committee put on that it wasn't that long ago that when you had election administrators, civil rights lawyers, and computer technologists around the same table, that the only time that happened was during a deposition. And it's encouraging that we've moved beyond that now and that we're able to come together and work collaboratively to actually envision and plan for what the future of voting ought to look like in this country. And that's why I'm so excited to be a small part of the project that you just heard Susan talking about and have the opportunity to tell you about what we're doing in Los Angeles County. So the interesting thing about innovation is election administration is a field that has not traditionally been really about innovation. We've been a profession that really is about reacting and about being a practitioner, about taking the laws and the circumstances that are presented to us and putting together this big event that happens on a random Tuesday between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. Throughout a jurisdiction. But the reality is what we've learned over the last decade or so is that we have to start looking at elections differently, and we have to start looking at elections from the perspective of the voters who are participating in that process. And so I want to share with you a little bit about the journey that we started in Los Angeles County. It's not nearly complete. It's got a long way to go. One of the interesting things about innovation that I've learned is that you have to become comfortable being uncomfortable, because I am not able to stand before you today and tell you how this journey is going to end, what it's going to look like at the end in LA County. We still have a long way to go. But what I can tell you is about the approach we're taking and why we're taking that approach. So let me start by talking a little bit about what voting looks like today in Los Angeles County. In Los Angeles County, we have 4.8 million registered voters. That's more voters than 32 of the 50 states in the country. So we are a unique jurisdiction that brings with it unique challenges. In a general election, we have 5,000 polling places. On Election Day, we really turn the process over to 25,000 volunteer community poll workers to ensure that the process works for us. We also serve voters in a very diverse jurisdiction. We're covered under the Voting Rights Act to provide language assistance in 10 different languages in written form and over 12 languages in terms of oral assistance and bilingual poll workers at our polling places. We have a large geographic area that we serve. Oftentimes people think of LA as just this urban center, this hub, the Hollywood effect and all that. The reality is we also have very rural areas in Los Angeles County, and we're stretched over a large space of geography, and we need to be able to recognize that and serve that. So where do we stand today? Well, the voting system that we use in Los Angeles County today, if you're not from Los Angeles County, will seem rather unique, or it will seem perhaps like a memory of voting systems of the past. We use a voting system that's called InkaVote. It's a modification of the old punch card system, and our votes are tabulated centrally at our location on election night. They come in from the polling places, sometimes by helicopter, sometimes by patrol car. So it's sort of like a military operation on election night. It's really quite a scene. But the core technology that we use, or that the voters use, to mark their ballots in LA County dates back to the introduction of punch card voting in 1968. That's still the infrastructure that we're using in LA County today. It has been modified after the end of punch card voting as a result of the 2000 election and a bond measure in the state of California. The system was converted to an optical scan system. So in that vote recording device that you see in the picture, instead of punching holes through those IBM punch cards, we actually are inking those dots. It's It's a little bit like if you go to bingo, using a bingo dauber to mark your ballot, and then they're run through modified card readers, IBM card readers, that look for those ink blots and count the votes. Now, there's a reason that we still have that system in LA County, and that's because of our size and our geography and our complexity, that we need a system that has a small form ballot that can be tabulated relatively quickly so that we can get out results on election night, that we can actually physically store those ballots for the retention period without having to lease or buy a complete separate building just to store the paper ballots after an election. So we were in the unique situation that when everybody else made their move from punch card voting to touchscreen voting, we did an assessment in LA County, and we determined that technology was not yet ready for a jurisdiction the size of LA County. Perhaps we've now learned that it maybe wasn't quite ready for any jurisdiction. But the good news is that seemed like bad news for us in LA County, and that was before I was in LA County. But in retrospect, it actually was a very important assessment, because we did not make that move. We intentionally made an incremental step to make our existing voting system compliant with the provisions of the Help America Vote Act. In 2007, we added a precinct ballot reader that alerts voters if they've overvoted or undervoted their ballot. For second chance voting purposes, we added an audio ballot booth, which is the blue box that you see behind me, that provides some level of accessible voting for voters with disabilities. Not ideal, but it did get us compliant. And we did this with the intent of knowing that we still had to move forward with a system that would last for a longer period of time, and that would be more in the spirit of the provisions of the Help America Vote Act. Unfortunately, the reality that we've lived in and that we find ourselves in is that the regulatory environment and the voting systems market as they exist today have not stepped up, have not allowed for a solution to that challenge. So we did a market analysis, recognized that there is no commercial voting system that's on the market today that can meet the needs of Los Angeles County to implement in our jurisdiction. And we also recognize that the regulatory environment that we operate in, both at the state and at the federal level, really has not allowed for the flexibility to innovate and to look for a new voting solution. But we are the largest elections jurisdiction in the country, and we need to be sure that we don't find ourselves in a situation where we can't administer elections. So we launched in 2009 what we refer to as the Los Angeles County Voting Systems Assessment Project, and we made a conscious decision that we were going to take a grassroots approach. We were going to step back from the limitations that we're conditioned to operate in the world of elections administration, and we're going to start to envision what a voting system that could work in Los Angeles County would look like, and how would we go about creating that, implementing it, and putting it in place. Scary prospect, a lot of risk involved, but from my perspective, not nearly the same level of risk of not being able to administer an election. So it really, it sounds like it was this great thing that we woke up and decided to do something cool. The reality is it's what we have to do, because otherwise we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult situation. So we launched this project, and it's a very iterative process. We made the decision to spend a couple of years just gathering data, learning about what the voter experience is, not so much about the technology that's used in elections, not so much about the legislative proposals that are out there to determine how elections are conducted, but really to listen to voters about what their voting experience is like. What do they like about their voting experience? What do they find lacking in that experience? What elements of the voting process give them confidence and trust that their vote is counted as it's intended and that it has meaning? What parts are the opposite? What are the barriers to participation, and all of that? So we did that we initially got a grant from the James Irvine Foundation and worked with the Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project to do a lot of that data gathering. We did stakeholder meetings, we did focus groups, we did voter surveys, and we really learned a lot from that. We talked to not just voters today, but we talked to voters who had voted in other jurisdictions and then come to LA County to find out what was that like, what did they see different about our voting experience. We talked to voters who who their entire voting life has been in Los Angeles County, what were their perceptions about voting. And we reached out to prospective voters. We talked to high school and college students, the people that represent the voters of the future that are going to use this voting system that we hopefully will have developed and manufactured and ready to implement at the time that they're going to be voting. From that research, we then assembled a group of stakeholders. I appointed a stakeholder advisory committee, about 16 members, that represents groups like the League of Women Voters, voting integrity activists, political party representatives, minority language advocates, disability advocates, and together with them we came together and we formed a set of 14 principles that are sort of the foundation of this project, and we came to those by consensus. What are the 14 things that every step of the way that we can go back and measure this project against and see, are we meeting the challenge that we set out for ourselves? From the stakeholder element, we then entered into an agreement. We partnered with the human-centered design firm IDEO out of the Bay Area. You may be familiar with IDEO. They're the group that did the design of the first Apple mouse and of the concept of a toothpaste tube. So they have a very unique and human-centered based design process that they go through, and they've really worked with us to, again, not to design the technology that we anticipate using for the voters, but to really envision what the voting experience ought to look like based on this research and data that we gathered. That's the element of the project that we're nearing completion of now. I'm going to show you, we actually have some prototypes. We're beginning to go kind of from the ethereal to something more tangible in the project, and we're very excited about that. Then we're going to move into a period of actually designing the specifications, and taking it out, doing user testing, and talking with the public about where we go next. So this is just kind of a word visual of the principles that we adopted as the foundation of the project. Hopefully these are things that are familiar to you and things that will resonate with you. Let me comment on a couple of them. We've been very adamant about doing this in a very transparent manner. We have committed to recognizing that elections is perhaps the most public act that we participate in, and so the development of a voting system and ultimately the ownership and operation of that system ought to be public as well. So all of the research that we've gathered, every step of this iterative design process, all of that is available, and our hope is that we do this in a way that it's both transparent but also transferable, so that when other jurisdictions begin looking at and having the need to move forward with a new voting system, that they can use this information as well. And that perhaps even beyond the voting system project, that this could be an example of a way to approach large public systems migrations. So other things that you can see in there, we want the flexibility in the system. We are in this unique situation where we've had a voting system that has operated for 40 plus years by and large. We're going to make a large public investment of funds to replace it. We want to be sure that the next voting system has the ability to adapt and change as voter behaviors and voter expectations take place, that we don't just get a solution that lasts for a couple of years and then we have to start this process over again. Obviously, security, privacy of the vote. We made a decision at the beginning of this project that in today's environment, we need to have a paper record of the ballot, that the ultimate ballot for recount and audit purposes needs to be a paper-based ballot. But again, we want the adaptability that when and if there's a time that doesn't have to be the case, that our system can migrate to that as well. So we're recognizing kind of the space of time and the limitations that we have to operate under. So this is just a visual to kind of give you a little bit of perspective of the philosophy and the strategy that we've taken with this project. It really is a combination of three values: the values of recognizing voter needs and preferences, recognizing we have to acknowledge the operational conditions that we operate under, the complexity of our jurisdiction, and the technical feasibility. Are we really able to deliver something that meets these needs? And the sweet spot is sort of when those three things come together, and that's where we believe that we can find the innovative solutions, and that's where we're trying to focus. Again, for us, that means things like ultimately having a voting system that's publicly owned and publicly operated, that is designed and built for the voter experience as opposed to designed and modified and adjusted for the purposes of election administrator ease or around regulations that may be outdated or policy that maybe needs to be that needs to be changed in order to serve voters of the future. And that's a difficult prospect, but we don't want to, we intentionally did not want to be limited by policy decisions and regulations that are in place today that may in fact be outdated and actually work against the principles that we're trying to adopt. So part of this project is designing the voter experience, designing the equipment that will be used for that, but it's also identifying what are those policy decisions that we need to go back to the legislature and to our authorizing environment and push for change in order to ensure that we can move forward in a progressive way. So again, the kind of core value here is to design a new voter experience from a human-centered approach. We want this really to be about the voter every step of the way. So when we worked with IDEO, we spent a lot of time talking to voters. We interviewed them. I talked about the work that we did with Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project initially with focus groups and symposiums. IDEO went kind of the step beyond that and went out to a population that mirrored the community that we serve, the diversity, the age demographics, people with disabilities, and they actually met people on the street and talked to them about the voting experience, talked to people who have never voted, people who vote infrequently, people who vote all the time. In some cases, they actually went into their homes and had conversations with them so they could observe how they function in their day-to-day lives and see how that parallels into the voting experience. And it was quite fascinating, the things that we learned from that. I could go on and on about that. I'll share with you a few observations that we learned from that, and that is that I think there's a growing expectation that the voting population expects options for voting. There's very little that the voting public does in their day-to-day life where they don't get to make some choice between how they conduct their business. You know, some people prefer to go into a fast food restaurant and get their food. Some people prefer to go to a drive-thru. Some people prefer to buy their movie tickets at a kiosk. Other people want to stand in line and buy that from a cashier. That's what they're used to, and that's what they expect that from their interaction with public processes as well. We also heard a lot about the social element of voting, that people increasingly like to have conversations about what's on the ballot and to debate that and to hear the perspective of other folks in the process. We heard about stigmas associated with the voting process, which I think was really significant, that we as insiders, as election administrators and people who are engaged in the elections process tend to forget things like, you know, you have signs and you have instructions. How difficult can this be? Well, for a first-time voter, for somebody who's not experienced with this, there's a stigma attached with that, and there's a stigma attached with asking for assistance, because what we heard from voters is there's sort of this sense that when you walk into that polling place that the other people there, whether it be the poll workers or the other voters, that they sort of expect that you know what you're doing. So even though there's somebody there to assist you who you could ask questions, people are hesitant to ask questions. They actually were pretty forthcoming about saying that they just as soon fake it or pretend that they know what they were doing than to ask for assistance. So that's really important when you're designing a new voter experience. How do we eliminate that stigma, or how do we allow for a process that gets people the information they know to have a successful voting experience? We also heard that there is a lack of connectivity to what happens after you vote. When you go in and you deposit your ballot, very few people know what happens to that ballot afterwards and how that translates into ultimately getting election results and the impact that it has. So from that data, we wanted to take all of that data. We wanted to break those myths about the voting process. We wanted to make it something that would be engaging and inviting, and it would eliminate those barriers. So we spent a lot of time around storyboards and in discussion groups pouring through that data, talking about what was possible, kind of pushing ourselves to set aside the things that we already knew about voting from a practitioner standpoint and to really look at it from the voter experience. We started by looking at what are the things that happen before you go to vote, what happens during the act of voting, and then what, as a voter, happens after you cast that ballot. We had some fun with that. We spent a lot of time with foam board and cardboard making these prototypes, actually role-playing what the voting experience would look like. Some very interesting things that you might find amusing, but again, sort of enlightening. Amazing how significant the I voted sticker is in this dialogue. I would have never guessed that. Probably every voter that we talked to, that was the one common thread amongst all of them. So we had said at a certain point in this, we actually had prototypes or role plays of a part of the voting equipment that actually would spit out that I voted sticker for you, and that you could go take that self photo and post it on Twitter and all of that. But again, it's a little bit funny, but it's an important element to recognize that is a part of that social element and part of that voters' experience being significant. So from there, we did these kind of crazy brainstorming ideas, and from there we went into feasibility stages. I mean, is it possible to actually put together a voting process that would meet these needs? Do we have the capacity for it? Is it reasonable that we could fund that? And what would the specifications for something like that look like? From that, we began to have these renderings. So we would look at things like what kind of commercial off-the-shelf components could be incorporated into this to meet the kind of the lifespan and the adaptability. What types of things are familiar to a voter if they come in and they see the equipment? Is there an element of familiarity? Is it similar to their experience in other day-to-day functions? Is it something that can be customized to allow for the type of security and transportation and deployment that would be necessary in a voting environment? So again, just some early thinking around that. And then that iterated into more discrete drawings and more elaborate envisioning of what that equipment might look like. And again, so some of what you see here, none of these are real pieces of equipment. These are just sort of ideas that came out of the concepts and the research we were looking at. So you see things like that might be familiar, something that's more like a microphone stand or a luggage holder that you would have in your hotel to put your bag on. Things that might be familiar, again, both to the poll worker and to the voter. You see in one of the pictures how they're actually numbered signs above the equipment to give the voter immediately that impression that, okay, this is a three-step process. I need to go here, then I need to go here, and then I need to finish here. Subtle things that haven't really been, at least in my experience in over 20 years in elections administration, have not been a part of the design process. They've been the after-the-fact part of designing the voter experience. So we're trying to be in front of that. Then we went to even further iterations. So here you begin to see how the renderings incorporate the privacy of the voter, the accessibility features, thinking about what do you do about power? How do we connect these all to a power source? And how do we have backup power for them? How do we transport them and how do we store them? And then we took those prototypes, so those were actually developed into visually, they're not really fully functional prototypes, but they were actually put together in a fairly sophisticated way so that we could actually walk voters through that, do a walkthrough. And we, again, went back out into our community, randomly got people that represented the demographics of our community, and walked them through these three different possibilities of what the voter experience could look like, got their feedback so that we could eventually refine that into one concept. During this process, one thing I would highlight is we took these sample prototypes to places like the Cerebral Palsy Center of Los Angeles, which was perhaps in the course of my career one of the most enlightening and engaging experiences that I've had, because we had a room full of about 18 active voters, active and engaged voters who participate in elections who have severe disabilities. And if you know anything about cerebral palsy, there's not one description of the limitations of that disease. It's different for every person who has it. So to be able to watch them use these prototypes to give us feedback about what that experience is like, and to feel like they were being heard and recognized for their ability to cast an independent vote was really quite amazing, and we got a lot of benefit from that. It's interesting how we've spent a lot of time in this country since the passage of the Help America Vote Act around the words and the policy about what it means to provide a voting system that's accessible to people with disabilities. The words you hear when you're actually engaging with those voters is very different. They're very informed about what they need, and they're also very willing to tell you where there can be flexibility in that and where there can't be flexibility in that. And there's a lot to be said about that, and I think that's made our project significantly more productive. So from there, further refinement, back to the storyboards, back to the role plays, back to experience mapping and tracking back to our principles, walking back through all of that data and saying, so what have we learned? Are we still tracking with those 14 principles that we started with? What policies have we identified that need to be raised in terms of legislation or otherwise in order to move forward on that? A kind of quick side note on that, we did successfully pass a law in California last year, Senate Bill 360, which fundamentally changes the way California approaches the testing and certification of voting equipment, and that was an output of this project, and it has created a state-only certification process. It also allows for the first time for there to be pilot projects that look at things like public ownership of voting systems, that look at things like actually putting in the law the capability to do risk-limiting audits on voting systems, the concept of disclosed source code, those kind of things that we've been talking about for a long time. We've actually now put those into the law in California and also freed up for the first time some of the funding that has been set aside for voting systems in California to be used for the research and development of a project of this nature, whereas before, even when funding was allocated, that funding was limited to the purchase of an existing certified voting system, which was of no help, of course, to us in Los Angeles County. So we were very pleased that having that data enabled us to make a case, a compelling case to the legislature and to the governor, and we were able to successfully pass that legislation. So where do we stand today? This is our latest prototype, and this is a more sophisticated prototype. It is it's not fully functional, but it is something that we can take out to voters, walk them through what that voting experience would look like, and continue to get their feedback. But I think we're getting close to what we're going to start to look for specifications. Little more detail on that. Ooh, that's a blank slide. Okay, maybe you don't get to see more detail of that. All right. Basically, what you see here is a tablet-based interface where the voter would interact with a tablet-based user interface to make their selections. They would confirm those selections. It would print out a paper-based ballot that then is deposited into a ballot box and actually is tabulated on a system that's entirely separate from the system that was used to mark the ballot. It has a pull-out tray that has tactile buttons and Braille capability for disability access. I won't go into a lot of detail on that, but a lot of information that was informed by a great deal by our advocates and our experience with voters with disabilities. It's designed so that it can be assembled and disassembled rather quickly, can be stored relatively easily. There were things like the considerations of weight. How do you stack these things? How do you move them? How do you deploy them out to 5,000 polling locations? But also recognizing that perhaps we're moving to a time where voting is going to take place in vote centers in addition to neighborhood polling places, and how do we anticipate that as well? They're fixed height, but they're designed so they can also go on at tabletops, so there's adjustability in that sense. See where we're okay. So what's the future of voting in Los Angeles County? So here's what we think, and we still have a long way to go on this journey, but we recognize that it's an iterative process. It's not all going to happen at once. We have a lot of details that we still have to go through, but what we have sort of fixated on is a model that eventually will allow for vote centers, that will allow for an electronic roster that allows voters to check in, to get instructions, that it would be a touchscreen pre-marking process that would allow a voter, if they wanted to, and again, this goes back to the value of options, that if a voter wanted to take their sample ballot and access that through a mobile device or a computer and pre-mark that over a period of time, so they're doing their homework, they're thinking about how they want to do that, they could actually bring that pre-marked ballot with them to the polling place, scan that, have it brought up on the screen, confirm that it was interpreted correctly, and then print out that paper ballot. Again, not everyone would have to do that, but it's an option that would be available to them. And the ballot marking device would be separate from the tabulation. That's a unique feature that we believe provides some independence and some security that's necessary, but also allows us to further adapt the voter experience without having to start all over on the tabulation side. So we completed the research phase of this project. Again, I want to thank the Irvine Foundation and Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project. It's those kind of organizations that have enabled this. We could not have done this with with public money. There wasn't the structure to do that with public money. We had to have people who were willing, organizations that were willing to help us with that process. We moved into the system design phase, working with IDEO. We're just about complete with that. We're now going to begin to actually write specifications for this. And the beauty of this is the group that's writing the specifications and that has done the design on this has no interest and will have no involvement in actually doing the manufacturing and the marketing or the selling of this equipment. So they are really focused on our principles and our voter experience and making sure that we get specifications that are good and tight and that we can then go out and competitively bid the manufacturing of this system. We still need to design the tabulation system. We still need to figure out our options for remote voters. We have a considerable percentage of our voters who are vote-by-mail voters. We need to have an option for them. But we wanted to start and spend the greatest period of time on the voter experience and let that guide us through the process. And we think that's been very successful. So where we stand today is that we have something that's captured people's attention. Our authorizing environment recognizes what we're doing. There are a number of organizations interested in what we're doing, and we're getting a lot of support for this. I was very pleased to see that the Presidential Commission highlighted the lingering crisis with voting equipment in this country, and appreciate that they sort of, through their report, put out a call to action. They validated some of the things that we have learned through our research, so things like vote centers and expanded access for remote voting. It enables us to kind of push those policies further, and I hope likewise our project helps other people to do that. So again, I think innovation is not easy. It's risky. We don't know what the end product is going to look like, but we do know that we need to offer something better to our voters, and we recognize in LA County that the best way to do that is to meet voters where they're at, to figure out how they function, what's meaningful to them, and to make it available where they're at rather than them having to come and seek it from us. And that's what we're trying to do in LA County. I invite you to follow along on the project. Our website has a section devoted to this project. Again, it's very transparent. Every element of the project is out there, from the early renderings to the latest prototypes. And we invite input. That's really what has made the project a success so far, and we believe that continuing along this path that we will be able to meet the future needs of the voters and sort of to remove the administrative barriers to voting from the equation so that other groups can focus on the engagement and the mobilization efforts that will affect turnout in the future. Thank you, and look forward to sharing more in the future.
Thank you, Dean. And I'd now like to introduce Dana DeBeauvoir from Travis County, Texas, who I talked about a little earlier. She's here. Dana.
Good morning, everyone. A chilly morning for everyone. It is so nice to be here with you. I'm so impressed with Dean Logan. Is he not just brilliant? Yes. And courageous. And it does take a little bit of guts, perhaps a little bit of stamina to jump out there and try to do something better for voters when you're unhappy with what's in the marketplace today. And that's what he and I are both trying to do. We arrived at our conclusions separately, found out pretty quickly that we both felt the same way about what was in the marketplace, and that it was not going to be helpful to try to make do in the marketplace for what our voters were going to want for the future, especially since he and I both saw that we were approaching voting programs that were not going to be addressed by the current marketplace. For example, the one that you may know the most about is vote centers. Optical scan, which is which has been one of the most the best program to try to prove up how people voted in the most easily auditable system. It has lots of problems, and I'm not a big fan, but it's been a way for voters to have confidence that, at least for the most part, given a percentage of error rate, that their vote would be counted the way they cast it. If we focus, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, if we continue to focus only on optical scan, though, we are seriously limiting ourselves for the future. Before I digress into that piece of the speech I have for you, excuse me, I would like to orient you as to what we're doing in Texas, especially in Travis County. I'm the Travis County clerk, and what we're trying to do is very like Dean's project. We're trying to design or develop and design and build a prototype and then actually build out a system to put into the marketplace that will be an improvement over what is currently offered in the marketplace. We have every intentions of going through the requirements for certification, both at the federal and state level. And we're early in the process, but we've made a lot of progress. And what I'd like to report to you today is I'd like to give you a status, an update of where we are with Star Vote. Now, very quickly, can I see a show of hands for who already is a little bit familiar with what Star Vote is? Okay, good. I've got a good start on it. All right, very quickly, for those of you who need a little bit of orientation, Star Vote stands for security, transparency, auditability, and reliability, the things that we felt were most important in a new voting system. The Star Vote system came about because, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later too, the system that we have in Travis County right now is a HART E-Slate system. It's operating fine, but it is beginning to age. And so we started looking in 2009, so we've been working on this project for a while. The idea was we knew we needed to buy a new system within a few years. It usually takes, I have found in this process, about 3 years to get a new system. The idea was let's start, and then by the time we finish what we would consider a normal process, we'll be able to purchase something on the marketplace about the time that our E-Slate voting system ages out. That was the grand plan. That started in 2009 with a citizens group that said, all right, let's go forth and find something that we think will work. That citizens committee of about 45 individuals, a mix from all walks and all stripes, looked at the marketplace, and they were actually pretty horrified. The upshot of the whole thing was that none of the additional security that we wanted and we felt like we should expect was found in today's marketplace. The same products had been dusted off, given a new coat of paint, and were being sold today that were sold 10 years ago. Nothing had advanced, and that was so disappointing because, of course, we had been through the security wars. Everybody here remembers how incredibly painful and damaging that whole past history was. So for there to have been nothing that came out of those discussions, if I can put it politely, was so heartbreaking. So the study group came back to me and said, we're not happy with anything we see on the market, and if these systems are going to cost millions of dollars, we really can't in good faith recommend that you go tell Commissioner's Court to spend millions on a system that has at least 10-year-old technology and not the security that we really want for the future. So I agreed with them. I was very disappointed at what I saw. And so we began back in 2009 to design something that would work. My first effort to try to do this was that I reached out to Professor Dan Wallach, one of the folks who had vociferously criticized me for my use of the HART system. And I figured, if I'm going to have help designing a system that is better than the ones that are there, let's go to the folks who are the most expert in electronic voting system security. I found a willing ally, even though he had been such a previous detractor, a perfectly willing ally. Oh, and he brought in some of his wonderful friends people like Josh Benelow and Bob Stein and Philip Stark, who is just amazing. And I don't want to call attention to some without saying that the entire group basically handed their lives over to me for certain periods of time. And this group of brilliant folks designed a system that included the kinds of end-to-end and encryption techniques that we want to see in future voting technologies. And that started the ball rolling. Now, that's where we are today with StarVote. So the update that I have for you is this. The most fun thing about this system is getting to start from the idea that voters have the right to not only feel comfortable, but have the full faith and knowledge that every ballot that they count, not only do they know that that ballot is counted correctly and accurately, and that every single one of them is counted, but that I can go to bed at night after the election's over with and be able to represent to my community. Yes, you've spent a lot of money on a voting system, and your money was well spent because I know what happens behind the scenes. That is a level higher than even what we want for voters, and both of those are valid and necessary for the future, I think. What I like about StarVote is that it offers the best of both worlds. It is an electronic voting system, but it also has a paper element for the voter. It gives us fast and accurate tallying, and it takes care of voters with disabilities, which is part of the ADA law for HAVA. And it positions counties to be able to offer early voting programs of all different kinds, as well as the new outreach programs for vote centers. And these systems are being increasingly demanded by voters of all ages. And these systems cannot be accommodated by optical scan systems. StarVote also gives voters a paper element that they actually hold in their hands. So it's not a VPAT, it's not under glass, and by having the voter actually have this printout, it's very like what you just saw with Dean Logan's system. We really do have a synergy going in the sense that what he needs for a very different and huge county experience on his end actually does fit a lot of other county experiences that you'll find in the rest of the United States, even though you think what he's got is so extreme. But this paper complement is a printout of what voter actually selected, so a ballot replica, if you will, of what the voter's choices are, that then the voter confirms that, yes, this is what I voted for, or declines. And under Texas law, the declination of that particular ballot would be treated just like a spoiled ballot. So what we've tried to do with this voting system is design it so that it stays within as many of the Texas election laws and current VDSG standards as is possible, so that we don't run into legal and certification problems later. So if we treat it like a spoiled ballot, it goes back treated normally that way, and the voter repeats the voting process. The ballot that they take, the intention of the ballot is that then we put it into a ballot box. However, that ballot box is not a precinct ballot counter. The ballot only is the image, if you will, is captured in the sense that now we have a marker, a capture of the ballot that matches what was on the electronic side. Now we have a cast ballot. Okay, until you have both pieces in place, we don't have a cast ballot. We have a voting in process scenario. All right, now, let me go back. I wanted to give you the overview, but let me go back and pick up some of the details about StarVote for you. All right, we start out with a tablet, very, very like what you saw earlier, an accessible tablet, so sip and puff, keys, whatever it is we need to have. There may even be newer accessible devices, or simply access ports for people who have their own devices, and that's we're beginning to see more of that. An access tablet that has the capability to print out, and we're considering sheet printout of archival quality thermal paper is a possibility, or just regular sheet paper. We want to make sure that we've got options. The tablet may be larger size for the practical reason that it's a lot easier to have a bigger tablet in use and to protect against theft than if you had a smaller one that's really easy to stick in your pocket and walk away with. So perhaps a larger tablet with this printout. And voters cast their ballot on something that looks like a tablet. The printer attached to the tablet prints out a version of the ballot. It will kind of look like a VPAT, because we may go with a narrow format depending on what we discover with the printers and the printer paper, but maybe not. And then what happens is that this gives the voters, like I said, the opportunity to look at it, and then if they decide they want to proceed, they go and put it into a ballot box that is basically a scan only. We do want, all right, when they put their ballot in the ballot box, it scans a barcode on the ballot to confirm that it's been cast. So it will be a barcode. We're discussing the relative merits of 1D and 2D barcodes. Just to let those of you in the room who know about that kind of stuff know that there are lots of side conversations going on. Okay, COTS, off-the-shelf, commercially available hardware. We do want a system that has those elements to it, partly for the cost. In fact, the major reason is for the cost, but it's also because we believe that with the marketplace developing new products at a 2 to 3 year time frame, we have the opportunity for taking advantage of newer technology much faster if we go with a COTS model than if we stick with vendor proprietary boxes. The thing that I'm thinking about now about COTS is, how do we manage for the future? And I'm thinking that we can do this, but how do we manage for the future the changing equipment, knowing how county government operates? I'm probably only going to get money to be able to update. Once I'm in that environment, I'm only going to be able to have money to update, say, half the county. I need all new voting tablets, 3 years into this. So the new Sony taps, maybe. That I buy, and I'm going to need to have 50% of the county that I can replace, and then 2 years later we'll do the other 50% of the county. Well, have I got upgrade issues there and compatibility issues, and all of that's getting better over time? Nevertheless, how are we going to manage that, and how are we going to manage it on a more than one county basis? And I'll tell you why I think that's going to be an issue that we're going to deal with for the future. Okay, so lots of COTS opportunities. It could be that the ballot box is the only deviation away from commercially available off the shelf. And it might be designed, that's a possibility. It could be that all of the equipment is what we would call a one-off COTS. We may go to, say, a medical manufacturer or NASA, down in Houston for us, or somebody else to do a box that's general production. It's not a specialty box in the sense of proprietary vendor box, but we may be able to get higher quality if we go with something that's manufactured for some other industry. We can buy lots of them; they're readily available. So that's another possibility for a slightly different version of commercially available hardware. Okay, the system will be modular. The building the ballot part, the tallying the ballots on election night, those are separate pieces, along with a by-mail portion. along with the auditing portion. They're all built into modular pieces so that you don't have to have a situation where you have to recertify or work on the entire system, where in order to make any progress, you can focus on one module, leave everything else the same. Only have to deal with one module for any upgrades. Perhaps you're really only worried about making sure your tallying system stays updated. We're still working on end-to-end auditing. Maybe that's where we spend our first few years, making upgrades and corrections and fine tweaking, and we don't have to change any of the other modules. Fine, let's focus on that and only worry about interoperability between the two, and we don't have to recertify the entire system. Much, much faster, much cheaper to get through the certification process with other labs and at the federal and the state level. I'm hoping, too, that modular approach will buy us some flexibility, because it's possible that while we really think, and I'm pledged to this idea, I really do think that voting systems should be open source. What? No applause? Yeah. I think that's the right direction to move. But recognizing that we're in this for the long haul, that it may be that we focus the open source part of it on really the important part of the system, the ballot building, the tallying, and the auditing. That's where it really needs to count. And maybe it really doesn't matter. Maybe there's room for negotiation or room for work first in this area, and maybe later on we work with other areas. Maybe it really doesn't matter if we do open source right away for the part of the voting system that does election management, polling place, election judges. Maybe putting together systems that are already in the marketplace today for the election management software or the by-mail programs. It's possible those could stay the same. Those could be mix and match, which we've often talked about building voting systems. It's possible that we could compromise and have a system that was a little bit of both, or we just stick to our guns and say we demand open source and that's it. But as we're trying to grow these and build these, that's a possibility for how we might step into the future. The focus for open source starts with the actual building, tallying, and auditing, the vote of the ballot. Okay, in addition to for COTS and for how we might handle the open source question, and but I should mention too that when I just say open source, I'm kind of just throwing a word out there. We need to define open source. It needs to be very clear exactly what we mean, exactly what the protections are for whoever builds this first set, so that when it's given to somebody else, they know their obligations for maintaining what's in there, and they know their freedoms for being able to modify or customize according to their own county's needs. The presumption is that we do want to share these systems with other counties. That's not a top priority with Dean's system. However, one of the things that we really care about with StarVote is I want to make it available on the marketplace for as low a price, $1 if I can, as low a price as possible for as many counties as are interested. And I want to make it available. Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to talk in just a minute about how much trouble I'm in for wanting to do that. Okay, open source code. The other thing that I think is really important too, as I go through these steps and thinking about how to build this system, and we will have a prototype. I hope maybe by this time next year, maybe I can be back up parallel with Dean. We're on some kind of parallel railroad tracks here with a prototype. I'm hoping that maybe I can be that far along. But I think the other thing that's really important to build this system that has not been done with the vendors, and they could have done it, if not 10 years ago, at least last year, we want to use a red team, blue team approach in building the thing. I think that if we do it that way, you end up with the third party step back, the sort of arm's length situation where whoever is actually building it has no vested interest in how the thing is designed or what happens with the actual coding. And I think I think that's really crucial in building it, and obviously Dean and I agree on that. But I'd like to have it challenged while it's being built, because I think that will help us speed up certification. I think if it's already been, kicked and shoved around before it ever gets to the point where the code is ready, so to speak, ready to be used, then by the time we get to certification, perhaps it won't cost us millions of dollars and take months and months, maybe even years to get through certification. So red team, blue team to actually build the thing. Okay, StarVote also uses newly created cryptographic practices that will add security measures and a means of detection for anything deliberate or accidental errors in the system that were never used before. I'm not suggesting that vendors should have been using cryptographic. I'm offering this as an additional aid, an additional feature in voting systems for the future that is not on the marketplace that I'm hoping the vendors would like. And we're going to talk about vendors in just a second. And the best part about STAR, I think that the thing that makes it so much better than what we have on the marketplace today is that for every single election, that it's part of the process that the results are audited after every election. Every election becomes evidence-based. Each one is proven up at the ballot-to-ballot level, not the totals-to-totals level, which is often what we see, but individual ballot to individual ballot. And I think if we can offer that, then what we've got a whole new world for not only for the voters, but for election administrators. There's no one who has to trust me or Dean or any of the, I forget how many thousands and thousands of elections administrators there are in the United States. You don't have to trust that I'm honest. You don't have to trust that I'm competent. You just have to look at the math and the matching of the ballots, and any voter can perform that kind of mathematical comparison. They don't have to wonder about any evil doing. They don't have to wonder about any of that stuff when it comes to tallying the ballots. It's a completely different approach. We spend all this time certifying that our systems will match. That we can actually tally. We test up front, we test up front, we test up front. And we don't spend the time that we need to make sure that the result on the end is actually a system. I'm going to have to wrap up. I've not had the chance to talk to you about vendors, other than just to say I want them in this game too. The fact that they are reluctant to join, and they are, is, I hope, temporary. I think they should come in because basically I'm handing them a free product that they can take and use on their own and turn around to sell to other people. Granted, they're not going to make the money that they used to make. I hope those days are over anyway. I'm tired of county governments being soaked for millions of dollars. It's time to end that. And in the meantime, if we could stop the back and the forth and get over this transition where vendors are no longer going to be having this revenue stream that they can count on for the future. They're going to be integrators for the future. They're going to help us solve some of these problems about trying to put COTS systems into play on the ground. They could be a part of our world, and please help me continue to welcome them into the fold because they're better with us than outside. We need them, especially counties that don't have the resources that Dean and I have. I'd love to talk to you more, and you are such wonderful folks for attending today, and I very much appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
I think we want to thank Dean and Dana for what is really very thought-provoking comments and a lot of great work that we hope to hear more about in coming years. You have a 20-minute break. We're going to start promptly at 11 o'clock, and please be back in your seats at that point in time. Thank you.